I go once more the long road to the castle keep. All my surroundings seem filled with agitation, seem to be looking at me, and then look away again so as not to disturb me, yet cannot refrain the very next moment from trying to read the saving solution from my expression.
I shake my head. I have not yet found any solution. Nor do I go to the castle keep in pursuance of any plan. I pass the spot where I had intended to begin the experimental trench. I look it over once more. It would have been an admirable place to begin it. The trench's course would have been in the direction where lay the majority of the tiny ventilation holes, which would have greatly lightened my labors. Perhaps I should not have had to dig very far, should not even have had to dig to the source of the noise. Perhaps if I had listened to the ventilation holes it would have been enough. But no consideration is potent enough to animate me to this labor of digging. This trench will bring me certainty, you say? I have reached the stage where I no longer wish to have certainty. In the castle keep I choose a lovely piece of flayed red flesh and creep with it into one of the heaps of earth. There I shall have silence at least, such silence, at any rate, as still can be said to exist here. I munch and nibble at the flesh, think of the strange beast going its own road in the distance, and then again that I should enjoy my store of food as fully as possible, while I still have the chance. This last is probably the sole plan I have left that I can carry out. For the rest I try to unriddle the beast's plans. Is it on its wanderings, or is it working on its own burrow? If it is on its wanderings, then perhaps an understanding with it might be possible. If it should really break through to the burrow, I shall give it some of my stores and it will go on its way again. It will go its way again, a fine story. Lying in my heap of earth I can naturally dream of all sorts of things, even of an understanding with the beast, though I know well enough that no such thing can happen, and that at the instant when we see each other, more, at the moment when we merely guess at each other's presence, we shall both blindly bare our claws and teeth, neither of us a second before or after the other, both of us filled with a new and different hunger, even if we should already be gorged to bursting. And with entire justice, for who, even if he were merely on his wanderings, would not change his itinerary and his plans for the future on catching sight of the burrow? But perhaps the beast is digging in its own burrow, in which case I cannot even dream of an understanding. Even if it should be such a peculiar beast that its burrow could tolerate a neighbor, my burrow could not tolerate a neighbor, at least not a clearly audible one. Now actually the beast seems to be a great distance away. If it would only withdraw a little farther the noise too would probably disappear. Perhaps in that case everything would be peaceful again as in the old days. All this would then become a painful but salutary lesson, spurring me on to make the most diverse improvements on the burrow. If I have peace, and danger does not immediately threaten me, I am still quite fit for all sorts of hard work. Perhaps, considering the enormous possibilities which its powers of work open before it, the beast has given up the idea of extending its burrow in my direction, and is compensating itself for that in some other one. That consummation also cannot, of course, be brought about by negotiation, but only by the beast itself, or by some compulsion exercised from my side. In both cases the decisive factor will be whether the beast knows about me, and if so what it knows. The more I reflect upon it the more improbable does it seem to me that the beast has even heard me. It is possible, though I can't imagine it, that it can have received news of me in some other way, but it has certainly never heard me. So long as I still knew nothing about it, it simply cannot have heard me, for at that time I kept very quiet. Nothing could be more quiet than my return to the burrow. Afterwards, when I dug the experimental trenches, perhaps it could have heard me, though my style of digging makes very little noise, but if it had heard me I must have noticed some sign of it. The beast must at least have stopped its work every now and then to listen. But all remained unchanged. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Josephine the Singer. Or the Mouse Folk. Our singer is called Josephine. Anyone who has not heard her does not know the power of song. There is no one but is carried away by her singing, a tribute all the greater as we are not in general a music-loving race. Tranquil peace is the music we love best. Our life is hard. We are no longer able, even on occasions when we have tried to shake off the cares of daily life, to rise to anything so high and remote from our usual routine as music. But we do not much lament that. We do not get even so far. A certain practical cunning, which admittedly we stand greatly in need of, we hold to be our greatest distinction, and with a smile born of such cunning we are wont to console ourselves for all shortcomings, even supposing, only it does not happen, that we were to yearn once in a way for the kind of bliss which music may provide. Josephine is the sole exception. She has a love for music and knows too how to transmit it. She is the only one. When she dies, music, who knows for how long, will vanish from our lives. I have often thought about what this music of hers really means. For we are quite unmusical. How is it that we understand Josephine's singing, or, since Josephine denies that, at least think we can understand it? The simplest answer would be that the beauty of her singing is so great that even the most insensitive cannot be deaf to it, but this answer is not satisfactory. If it were really so, her singing would have to give one an immediate and lasting feeling of being something out of the ordinary, a feeling that from her throat something is sounding which we have never heard before and which we are not even capable of hearing, something that Josephine alone and no one else can enable us to hear. But in my opinion that is just what does not happen. I do not feel this and have never observed that others feel anything of the kind. Among intimates we admit freely to one another that Josephine's singing, as singing, is nothing out of the ordinary. Is it in fact singing at all? Although we are unmusical we have a tradition of singing, in the old days our people did sing. This is mentioned in legends and some songs have actually survived, which, it is true, no one can now sing. Thus we have an inkling of what singing is, and Josephine's art does not really correspond to it. So is it singing at all? Is it not perhaps just a piping? And piping is something we all know about. It is the real artistic accomplishment of our people, or rather no mere accomplishment but a characteristic expression of our life. We all pipe, but of course no one dreams of making out that our piping is an art. We pipe without thinking of it, indeed without noticing it, and there are even many among us who are quite unaware that piping is one of our characteristics. So if it were true that Josephine does not sing but only pipes and perhaps, as it seems to me at least, hardly rises above the level of our usual piping, yet, perhaps her strength is not even quite equal to our usual piping, whereas an ordinary farmhand can keep it up effortlessly all day long, besides doing his work. If that were all true, then indeed Josephine's alleged vocal skill might be disproved, but that would merely clear the ground for the real riddle which needs solving, the enormous influence she has. After all, it is only a kind of piping that she produces. If you post yourself quite far away from her and listen, or, still better, put your judgment to the test, whenever she happens to be singing along with others, by trying to identify her voice, you will undoubtedly distinguish nothing but a quite ordinary piping tone, which at most differs a little from the others through being delicate or weak. Yet if you sit down before her, it is not merely a piping. To comprehend her art it is necessary not only to hear but to see her. Even if hers were only our usual workaday piping, there is first of all this peculiarity to consider, that here is someone making a ceremonial performance out of doing the usual thing. To crack a nut is truly no feat, so no one would ever dare to collect an audience in order to entertain it with nut cracking. But if all the same one does do that and succeeds in entertaining the public, then it cannot be a matter of simple nut cracking. Or it is a matter of nut cracking, but it turns out that we have overlooked the art of cracking nuts because we were too skilled in it, and that this newcomer to it first shows us its real nature, even finding it useful in making his effects to be rather less expert in nut cracking than most of us. Perhaps it is much the same with Josephine's singing. We admire in her what we do not at all admire in ourselves. In this respect, I may say, she is of one mind with us. I was once present when someone, as of course often happens, drew her attention to the folk piping everywhere going on, making only a modest reference to it, yet for Josephine that was more than enough. A smile so sarcastic and arrogant as she then assumed I have never seen. She, who in appearance is delicacy itself, conspicuously so even among our people who are prolific in such feminine types, seemed at that moment actually vulgar. She was at once aware of it herself, by the way, with her extreme sensibility, and controlled herself. At any rate she denies any connection between her art and ordinary piping. For those who are of the contrary opinion she has only contempt and probably unacknowledged hatred. This is not simple vanity, for the opposition, with which I too am half in sympathy, certainly admires her no less than the crowd does. But Josephine does not want mere admiration, she wants to be admired exactly in the way she prescribes. Mere admiration leaves her cold. And when you take a seat before her, you understand her. Opposition is possible only at a distance. When you sit before her, you know. This piping of hers is no piping. Since piping is one of our thoughtless habits, one might think that people would pipe up in Josephine's audience too. Her art makes us feel happy, and when we are happy we pipe. But her audience never pipes, it sits in mouse-like stillness, as if we had become partakers in the peace we long for, from which our own piping at the very least holds us back. We make no sound. Is it her singing that enchants us, or is it not rather the solemn stillness enclosing her frail little voice? Once it happened while Josephine was singing that some silly little thing in all innocence began to pipe up too. Now it was just the same as what we were hearing from Josephine. In front of us the piping sound that despite all rehearsal was still tentative, and here in the audience the unself-conscious piping of a child. It would have been impossible to define the difference. But yet at once we hissed and whistled the interrupter down, although it would not really have been necessary, for in any case she would certainly have crawled away in fear and shame. Whereas Josephine struck up her most triumphal notes and was quite beyond herself, spreading her arms wide and stretching her throat as high as it could reach. That is what she is like always, every trifle, every casual incident, every nuisance, a creaking in the parquet, a grinding of teeth, a failure in the lighting incites her to heighten the effectiveness of her song. She believes anyhow that she is singing to deaf ears. There is no lack of enthusiasm and applause, but she has long learned not to expect real understanding, as she conceives it. So all disturbance is very welcome to her. Whatever intervenes from outside to hinder the purity of her song, to be overcome with a slight effort, even with no effort at all, merely by confronting it, can help to awaken the masses, to teach them not perhaps understanding but odd respect. And if small events do her such service, how much more do great ones? Our life is very uneasy. Every day brings surprises, apprehensions, hopes, and terrors, so that it would be impossible for a single individual to bear it all did he not always have by day and night the support of his fellows. But even so it often becomes very difficult. Frequently as many as 1,000 shoulders are trembling under a burden that was really meant only for one pair. Then Josephine holds that her time has come. So there she stands, the delicate creature, shaken by vibrations especially below the breastbone, so that one feels anxious for her. It is as if she has concentrated all her strength on her song, as if from everything in her that does not directly subserve her singing all strength has been withdrawn. almost all power of life, as if she were laid bare, abandoned, committed merely to the care of good angels, as if while she is so wholly withdrawn and living only in her song a cold breath blowing upon her might kill her. But just when she makes such an appearance, we who are supposed to be her opponents are in the habit of saying, "She can't even pipe, she has to put such a terrible strain on herself to force out not a song. We can't call it song, but some approximation to our usual customary piping." So it seems to us, but this impression, although, as I said, inevitable, is yet fleeting and transient. We too are soon sunk in the feeling of the mass, which, warmly pressed body to body, listens with indrawn breath. And to gather around her this mass of our people who are almost always on the run and scurrying hither and thither for reasons that are often not very clear, Josephine mostly needs to do nothing else than take up her stand, head thrown back, mouth half open, eyes turned upwards, in the position that indicates her intention to sing. She can do this where she likes, it need not be a place visible a long way off, any secluded corner pitched on in a moment's caprice will serve as well. The news that she is going to sing flies around at once and soon whole processions are on the way there. Now, sometimes, all the same, obstacles intervene. Josephine likes best to sing just when things are most upset. Many worries and dangers force us then to take devious ways. With the best will in the world we cannot assemble ourselves as quickly as Josephine wants, and on occasion she stands there in ceremonial state for quite a time without a sufficient audience. Then indeed she turns furious, then she stamps her feet, swearing in most unmaidenly fashion, she actually bites. But even such behavior does no harm to her reputation. Instead of curbing a little her excessive demands, people exert themselves to meet them. Messengers are sent out to summon fresh hearers. She is kept in ignorance of the fact that this is being done. On the roads all around sentries can be seen posted who wave on newcomers and urge them to hurry. This goes on until at last a tolerably large audience is gathered. What drives the people to make such exertions for Josephine's sake? This is no easier to answer than the first question about Josephine's singing, with which it is closely connected. One could eliminate that and combine them both in the second question, if it were possible to assert that because of her singing our people are unconditionally devoted to Josephine. But this is simply not the case. Unconditional devotion is hardly known among us. Ours are people who love slyness beyond everything, without any malice, to be sure, and childish whispering and chatter. Innocent, superficial chatter, to be sure, but people of such a kind cannot go in for unconditional devotion, and that Josephine herself certainly feels, that is what she is fighting against with all the force of her feeble throat. In making such generalized pronouncements, of course, one should not go too far. Our people are all the same devoted to Josephine, only not unconditionally. For instance, they would not be capable of laughing at Josephine. It can be admitted. In Josephine there is much to make one laugh, and laughter for its own sake is never far away from us. In spite of all the misery of our lives, quiet laughter is always, so to speak, at our elbows, but we do not laugh at Josephine. Many a time I have had the impression that our people interpret their relationship to Josephine in this way, that she, this frail creature, needing protection and in some way remarkable, in her own opinion remarkable for her gift of song, is entrusted to their care and they must look after her. The reason for this is not clear to anyone, only the fact seems to be established. But what is entrusted to one's care one does not laugh at. To laugh would be a breach of duty. The utmost malice which the most malicious of us wreak on Josephine is to say now and then, "The sight of Josephine is enough to make one stop laughing." So the people look after Josephine much as a father takes into his care a child whose little hand, one cannot tell whether in appeal or command, is stretched out to him. One might think that our people are not fitted to exercise such paternal duties, but in reality they discharge them, at least in this case, admirably. No single individual could do what in this respect the people as a whole are capable of doing. To be sure, the difference in strength between the people and the individual is so enormous that it is enough for the nursling to be drawn into the warmth of their nearness and he is sufficiently protected. To Josephine, certainly, one does not dare mention such ideas. "Your protection isn't worth an old song," she says then. Sure, old song, we think. And besides her protest is no real contradiction, it is rather a thoroughly childish way of doing, and childish gratitude, while a father's way of doing is to pay no attention to it. Yet there is something else behind it which is not so easy to explain by this relationship between the people and Josephine. Josephine, that is to say, thinks just the opposite. She believes it is she who protects the people. When we are in a bad way politically or economically, her singing is supposed to save us, nothing less than that, and if it does not drive away the evil, at least gives us the strength to bear it. She does not put it in these words or in any other, she says very little anyhow, she is silent among the chatterers, but it flashes from her eyes, on her closed lips. Few among us can keep their lips closed, but she can. It is plainly legible. Whenever we get bad news, and on many days bad news comes thick and fast at once, lies and half-truths included, she rises up at once, whereas usually she sits listlessly on the ground. She rises up and stretches her neck and tries to see over the heads of her flock like a shepherd before a thunderstorm. It is certainly a habit of children, in their wild, impulsive fashion, to make such claims, but Josephine's are not quite so unfounded as children's. True, she does not save us and she gives us no strength. It is easy to stage oneself as a savior of our people, inert as they are to suffering, not sparing themselves, swift in decision, well acquainted with death, timorous only to the eye in the atmosphere of reckless daring which they constantly breathe, and as prolific besides as they are bold. It is easy, I say, to stage oneself after the event as the savior of our people, who have always somehow managed to save themselves, although at the cost of sacrifices which make historians. Generally speaking, we ignore historical research entirely, quite horror-struck. And yet it is true that just in emergencies we hearken better than at other times to Josephine's voice. The menaces that loom over us make us quieter, more humble, more submissive to Josephine's domination. We like to come together, we like to huddle close to each other, especially on an occasion set apart from the troubles preoccupying us. It is as if we were drinking in all haste. Yes, haste is necessary. Josephine too often forgets that. From a cup of peace in common before the battle, it is not so much a performance of songs as an assembly of the people, and an assembly where except for the small piping voice in front there is complete stillness. The hour is much too grave for us to waste it in chatter. A relationship of this kind, of course, would never content Josephine. Despite all the nervous uneasiness that fills Josephine because her position has never been quite defined, there is still much that she does not see, blinded by her self-conceit, and she can be brought fairly easily to overlook much more. A swarm of flatterers is always busy about her to this end, thus really doing a public service, and yet to be only an incidental, unnoticed performer in a corner of an assembly of the people, for that, although in itself it would be no small thing, she would certainly not make us the sacrifice of her singing. Nor does she need to, for her art does not go unnoticed. Although we are at bottom preoccupied with quite other things, and it is by no means only for the sake of her singing that stillness prevails, and many a listener does not even look up but buries his face in his neighbor's fur, so that Josephine up in front seems to be exerting herself to no purpose. There is yet something, it cannot be denied, that irresistibly makes its way into us from Josephine's piping. This piping, which rises up where everyone else is pledged to silence, comes almost like a message from the whole people to each individual. Josephine's thin piping amidst grave decisions is almost like our people's precarious existence amidst the tumult of a hostile world. Josephine exerts herself, a mere nothing in voice, a mere nothing in execution. She asserts herself and gets across to us. It does us good to think of that. A really trained singer, if ever such a one should be found among us, we could certainly not endure at such a time, and we should unanimously turn away from the senselessness of any such performance. May Josephine be spared from perceiving that the mere fact of our listening to her is proof that she is no singer. An intuition of it she must have, else why does she so passionately deny that we do listen? Only she keeps on singing and piping her intuition away. But there are other things she could take comfort from. We do really listen to her in a sense, probably much as one listens to a trained singer. She gets effects which a trained singer would try in vain to achieve among us, and which are only produced precisely because her means are so inadequate. For this, doubtless, our way of life is mainly responsible. Among our people there is no age of youth, scarcely the briefest childhood. Regularly, it is true, demands are put forward that the children should be granted a special freedom, a special protection, that their right to be a little carefree, to have a little senseless giddiness, a little play, that this right should be respected and the exercise of it encouraged. Such demands are put forward and nearly everyone approves them. There is nothing one could approve more, but there is also nothing, in the reality of our daily life, that is less likely to be granted. One approves these demands. One makes attempts to meet them, but soon all the old ways are back again. Our life happens to be such that a child, as soon as it can run about a little and a little distinguish one thing from another, must look after itself just like an adult. The areas on which, for economic reasons, we have to live in dispersion are too wide, our enemies too numerous, the dangers lying everywhere in wait for us too incalculable. We cannot shelter our children from the struggle for existence. If we did so, it would bring them to an early grave. These depressing considerations are reinforced by another, which is not depressing, the fertility of our race. One generation, and each is numerous, treads on the heels of another. The children have no time to be children. Other races may foster their children carefully, schools may be erected for their little ones, out of these schools the children may come pouring daily, the future of the race, yet among them it is always the same children that come out day after day for a long time. We have no schools, but from our race come pouring at the briefest intervals the innumerable swarms of our children, merrily lisping or chirping so long as they cannot yet pipe, rolling or tumbling along by sheer impetus so long as they cannot yet run, clumsily carrying everything before them by mass weight so long as they cannot yet see, our children. And not the same children, as in those schools, no, always new children again and again, without end, without a break. Hardly does a child appear than it is no more a child, while behind it new childish faces are already crowding so fast and so thick that they are indistinguishable, rosy with happiness. Truly, however delightful this may be and however much others may envy us for it, and rightly, we simply cannot give a real childhood to our children. And that has its consequences. A kind of unexpended, ineradicable childishness pervades our people. In direct opposition to what is best in us, our infallible practical common sense, we often behave with the utmost foolishness, with exactly the same foolishness as children, senselessly, wastefully, grandiosely, irresponsibly, and all that often for the sake of some trivial amusement. And although our enjoyment of it cannot of course be so wholehearted as a child's enjoyment, something of this survives in it without a doubt. From this childishness of our people Josephine too has profited since the beginning. Yet our people are not only childish, we are also in a sense prematurely old. Childhood and old age come upon us not as upon others. We have no youth, we are all at once grown up, and then we stay grown up too long. A certain weariness and hopelessness spreading from that leaves a broad trail through our people's nature, tough and strong in hope that it is in general. Our lack of musical gifts has surely some connection with this. We are too old for music, its excitement, its rapture do not suit our heaviness, wearily we wave it away, we content ourselves with piping. A little piping here and there, that is enough for us. Who knows, there may be talents for music among us, but if there were, the character of our people would suppress them before they could unfold. Josephine on the other hand can pipe as much as she will, or sing or whatever she likes to call it. That does not disturb us, that suits us, that we can well put up with. Any music there may be in it is reduced to the least possible trace. A certain tradition of music is preserved, yet without making the slightest demand upon us. But our people, being what they are, get still more than this from Josephine. At her concerts, especially in times of stress, it is only the very young who are interested in her singing as singing. They alone gaze in astonishment as she purses her lips, expels the air between her pre-front teeth, half dies in sheer wonderment at the sounds she herself is producing, and after such a swooning swells her performance to new and more incredible heights, whereas the real mass of the people, this is plain to see, are quite withdrawn into themselves. Here in the brief intervals between their struggles our people dream, it is as if the limbs of each were loosened, as if the harried individual once in a while could relax and stretch himself at ease in the great, warm bed of the community. And into these dreams Josephine's piping drops note by note. She calls it pearl-like, we call it staccato. But at any rate here it is in its right place, as nowhere else, finding the moment wait for it as music scarcely ever does. Something of our poor brief childhood is in it, something of lost happiness that can never be found again, but also something of active daily life, of its small gaieties, unaccountable and yet springing up and not to be obliterated. And indeed this is all expressed not in full round tones but softly, in whispers, confidentially, sometimes a little hoarsely. Of course it is a kind of piping. Why not? Piping is our people's daily speech, only many a one pipes his whole life long and does not know it, where here piping is set free from the fetters of daily life, and it sets us free too for a little while. We certainly should not want to do without these performances. But from that point it is a long, long way to Josephine's claim that she gives us new strength and so on and so forth. For ordinary people, at least, not for her train of flatterers. What other explanation could there be? They say with quite shameless sauciness, how else could you explain the great audiences, especially when danger is most imminent, which have even often enough hindered proper precautions being taken in time to avert danger. Now, this last statement is unfortunately true, but can hardly be counted as one of Josephine's titles to fame, especially considering that when such large gatherings have been unexpectedly flushed by the enemy and many of our people left lying for dead, Josephine, who was responsible for it all, and indeed perhaps attracted the enemy by her piping, has always occupied the safest place and was always the first to whisk away quietly and speedily under cover of her escort. Still, everyone really knows that, and yet people keep running to whatever place Josephine decides on next, at whatever time she rises up to sing. One could argue from this that Josephine stands almost beyond the law, that she can do what she pleases, at the risk of actually endangering the community, and will be forgiven for everything. If this were so, even Josephine's claims would be entirely comprehensible. Yes, in this freedom to be allowed her, this extraordinary gift granted to her and to no one else in direct contravention of the laws, one could see an admission of the fact that the people do not understand Josephine, just as she alleges, that they marvel helplessly at her art, feel themselves unworthy of it, try to assuage the pity she rouses in them by making really desperate sacrifices for her and, to the same extent that her art is beyond their comprehension, consider her personality and her wishes to lie beyond their jurisdiction. Well, that is simply not true at all. Perhaps as individuals the people may surrender too easily to Josephine, but as a whole they surrender unconditionally to no one, and not to her either. For a long time back, perhaps since the very beginning of her artistic career, Josephine has been fighting for exemption from all daily work on account of her singing. She should be relieved of all responsibility for earning her daily bread and being involved in the general struggle for existence, which, apparently, should be transferred on her behalf to the people as a whole. A facile enthusiast, and there have been such, might argue from the mere unusualness of this demand, from the spiritual attitude needed to frame such a demand, that it has an inner justification. But our people draw other conclusions and quietly refuse it, nor do they trouble much about disproving the assumptions on which it is based. Josephine argues, for instance, that the strain of working is bad for her voice, that the strain of working is of course nothing to the strain of singing, but it prevents her from being able to rest sufficiently after singing and to recuperate for more singing. She has to exhaust her strength completely and yet, in these circumstances, can never rise to the peak of her abilities. The people listen to her arguments and pay no attention. Our people, so easily moved, sometimes cannot be moved at all. Their refusal is sometimes so decided that even Josephine is taken aback. She appears to submit, does her proper share of work, sings as best she can, but all only for a time, then with renewed strength. For this purpose her strength seems inexhaustible. She takes up the fight again. Now it is clear that what Josephine really wants is not what she puts into words. She is honorable, she is not work-shy, shirking in any case is quite unknown among us. If her petition were granted she would certainly live the same life as before. Her work would not at all get in the way of her singing, nor would her singing grow any better. What she wants is public, unambiguous, permanent recognition of her art, going far beyond any precedent so far known. But while almost everything else seems within her reach, this eludes her persistently. Perhaps she should have taken a different line of attack from the beginning. Perhaps she herself sees that her approach was wrong, but now she cannot draw back. Retreat would be self-betrayal. Now she must stand or fall by her petition. If she really had enemies, as she avers, they could get much amusement from watching this struggle, without having to lift a finger. But she has no enemies, and even though she is often criticized here and there, no one finds this struggle of hers amusing. Just because of the fact that the people show themselves here in their cold, judicial aspect, which is otherwise rarely seen among us. And however one may approve it in this case, the very idea that such an aspect might be turned upon oneself someday prevents amusement from breaking in. The important thing, both in the people's refusal and in Josephine's petition, is not the action itself, but the fact that the people are capable of presenting a stony, impenetrable front to one of their own, and that it is all the more impenetrable because in other respects they show an anxious paternal care, and more than paternal care, for this very member of the people. Suppose that instead of the people one had an individual to deal with. One might imagine that this man had been giving in to Josephine all the time while nursing a wild desire to put an end to his submissiveness one fine day. That he had made superhuman sacrifices for Josephine in the firm belief that there was a natural limit to his capacity for sacrifice. Yes, that he had sacrificed more than was needful merely to hasten the process, merely to spoil Josephine and encourage her to ask for more and more until she did indeed reach the limit with this last petition of hers. And that he then cut her off with a final refusal which was curt because long held in reserve. Now, this is certainly not how the matter stands. The people have no need of such guile. Besides, their respect for Josephine is well tried and genuine, and Josephine's demands are after all so far-reaching that any simple child could have told her what the outcome would be. Yet it may be that such considerations enter into Josephine's way of taking the matter and so add a certain bitterness to the pain of being refused. But whatever her ideas on the subject, she does not let them deter her from pursuing the campaign. Recently she has even intensified her attack. Hitherto she has used only words as her weapons, but now she is beginning to have recourse to other means, which she thinks will prove more efficacious but which we think will run her into greater dangers. Many believe that Josephine is becoming so insistent because she feels herself growing old and her voice falling off, and so she thinks it high time to wage the last battle for recognition. I do not believe it. Josephine would not be Josephine if that were true. For her there is no growing old and no falling off in her voice. If she makes demands it is not because of outward circumstances but because of an inner logic. She reaches for the highest garland not because it is momentarily hanging a little lower but because it is the highest. If she had any say in the matter she would have it still higher. This contempt for external difficulties, to be sure, does not hinder her from using the most unworthy methods. Her rights seem beyond question to her, so what does it matter how she secures them, especially since in this world, as she sees it, honest methods are bound to fail. Perhaps that is why she has transferred the battle for her rights from the field of song to another which she cares little about. Her supporters have let it be known that, according to herself, she feels quite capable of singing in such a way that all levels of the populace, even to the remotest corners of the opposition, would find it a real delight not by popular standards, for the people affirm that they have always delighted in her singing, but a delight by her own standards. However, she adds, since she cannot falsify the highest standards nor pander to the lowest, her singing will have to stay as it is. But when it comes to her campaign for exemption from work, we get a different story. It is of course also a campaign on behalf of her singing, yet she is not fighting directly with the priceless weapon of her song, so any instrument she uses is good enough. Thus, for instance, the rumor went around that Josephine meant to cut short her grace notes if her petition were not granted. I know nothing about grace notes, and have never noticed any in Josephine's singing. But Josephine is going to cut short her grace notes, not, for the present, to cut them out entirely, only to cut them short. Presumably she has carried out her threat, although I for one have observed no difference in her performance. The people as a whole listened in the usual way without making any pronouncement on the grace notes, nor did their response to her petition vary by a jot. It must be admitted that Josephine's way of thinking, like her figure, is often very charming. And so, for instance, after that performance, just as if her decision about the grace notes had been too severe or too sudden a move against the people, she announced that next time she would put in all the grace notes again. Yet after the next concert she changed her mind once more. There was to be definitely an end of these great arias with the grace notes, and until her petition was favorably regarded they would never recur. Well, the people let all these announcements, decisions and counter-decisions go in at one ear and out at the other, like a grown-up person deep in thought turning a deaf ear to a child's babble, fundamentally well-disposed but not accessible. Josephine, however, does not give in. The other day, for instance, she claimed that she had hurt her foot at work, so that it was difficult for her to stand up to sing, but since she could not sing except standing up, her songs would now have to be cut short. Although she limps and leans on her supporters, no one believes that she is really hurt. Granted that her frail body is extra sensitive, she is yet one of us and we are a race of workers. If we were to start limping every time we got a scratch, the whole people would never be done limping. Yet though she lets herself be led about like a cripple, though she shows herself in this pathetic condition oftener than usual, the people all the same listen to her singing thankfully and appreciatively as before, but do not bother much about the shortening of her songs. Since she cannot very well go on limping forever, she thinks of something else. She pleads that she is tired, not in the mood for singing, feeling faint. And so we get a theatrical performance as well as a concert. We see Josephine's supporters in the background begging and imploring her to sing. She would be glad to oblige, but she cannot. They comfort and caress her with flatteries, they almost carry her to the selected spot where she is supposed to sing. At last, bursting inexplicably into tears, she gives way, but when she stands up to sing, obviously at the end of her resources, weary, her arms not widespread as usual but hanging lifelessly down, so that one gets the impression that they are perhaps a little too short. Just as she is about to strike up, there, she cannot do it after all. An unwilling shake of the head tells us so and she breaks down before our eyes. To be sure, she pulls herself together again and sings, I fancy, much as usual. Perhaps, if one has an ear for the finer shades of expression, one can hear that she is singing with unusual feeling, which is, however, all to the good. And in the end she is actually less tired than before. With a firm tread, if one can use such a term for her tripping gait, she moves off, refusing all help from her supporters and measuring with cold eyes the crowd which respectfully makes way for her. That happened a day or two ago, but the latest is that she has disappeared, just at a time when she was supposed to sing. It is not only her supporters who are looking for her, many are devoting themselves to the search, but all in vain. Josephine has vanished, she will not sing. She will not even be cajoled into singing, this time she has deserted us entirely. Curious, how mistaken she is in her calculations, the clever creature, so mistaken that one might fancy she has made no calculations at all but is only being driven on by her destiny, which in our world cannot be anything but a sad one. Of her own accord she abandons her singing, of her own accord she destroys the power she has gained over people's hearts. How could she ever have gained that power, since she knows so little about these hearts of ours? She hides herself and does not sing, but our people, quietly, without visible disappointment, a self-confident mass in perfect equilibrium, so constituted, even though appearances are misleading, that they can only bestow gifts and not receive them, even from Josephine, our people continue on their way. Josephine's road, however, must go downhill. The time will soon come when her last notes sound and die into silence. She is a small episode in the eternal history of our people, and the people will get over the loss of her. Not that it will be easy for us. How can our gatherings take place in utter silence? Still, were they not silent even when Josephine was present? Was her actual piping notably louder and more alive than the memory of it will be? Was it even in her lifetime more than a simple memory? Was it not rather because Josephine's singing was already past losing in this way that our people in their wisdom prized it so highly? So perhaps we shall not miss so very much after all, while Josephine, redeemed from the earthly sorrows which to her thinking lay in wait for all chosen spirits, will happily lose herself in the numberless throng of the heroes of our people, and soon, since we are no historians, will rise to the heights of redemption and be forgotten like all her brothers. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. The Shorter Stories. Children on a Country Road. I heard the wagons rumbling past the garden fence, sometimes I even saw them through gently swaying gaps in the foliage. How the wood of their spokes and shafts creaked in the summer heat. Laborers were coming from the fields and laughing so that it was a scandal. I was sitting on our little swing, just resting among the trees in my parents' garden. On the other side of the fence the traffic never stopped. Children's running feet were past in a moment. Harvest wagons with men and women perched on and around the sheaves darkened the flower beds. Toward evening I saw a gentleman slowly promenading with a walking stick, and a couple of girls who met him arm in arm stepped aside into the grass as they greeted him. Then birds flew up as if in showers. I followed them with my eyes and saw how high they soared in one breath, till I felt not that they were rising but that I was falling, and holding fast to the ropes began to swing a little out of sheer weakness. Soon I was swinging more strongly as the air blew colder and instead of soaring birds trembling stars appeared. I was given my supper by candlelight. Often both my arms were on the wooden board and I was already weary as I bit into my bread and butter. The coarse mesh window curtains bellied in the warm wind and many a time some passer-by outside would stay them with his hands as if he wanted to see me better and speak to me. Usually the candle soon went out and in the sooty candle smoke the assembled midges went on circling for a while. If anyone asked me a question from the window I would gaze at him as if at a distant mountain or into vacancy, nor did he particularly care whether he got an answer or not. But if one jumped over the window sill and announced that the others were already waiting, then I did get to my feet with a sigh. What are you sighing for? What's wrong? Has something dreadful happened that can never be made good? Shan't we ever recover from it? Is everything lost? Nothing was lost. We ran to the front of the house. Thank God, here you are at last. You're always late. Why just me? Especially you. Why don't you stay at home if you don't want to come? No quarter. No quarter? What kind of way is that to talk? We ran our heads full tilt into the evening. There was no daytime and no nighttime. Now our waistcoat buttons would be clacking together like teeth. Again we would be keeping a steady distance from each other as we ran, breathing fire like wild beasts in the tropics. Like cuirassiers in old wars, stamping and springing high, we drove each other down the short alley and with this impetus in our legs a farther stretch along the main road. Stray figures went into the ditch. Hardly had they vanished down the dusky escarpment when they were standing like newcomers on the field path above and looking down. Come on down. Come on up first, so's you can push us down. No thanks, we're not such fools. You're afraid, you mean? Come on up, you cowards. Afraid? Of the likes of you? You're going to push us down, are you? That's a good one. We made the attempt and were pushed head over heels into the grass of the roadside ditch, tumbling of our own free will. Everything was equably warm to us. We felt neither warmth nor chill in the grass, only one got tired. Turning on one's right side, with a hand under the ear, one could easily have fallen asleep there. But one wanted to get up again with chin uplifted, only to roll into a deeper ditch. Then with an arm thrust out crosswise and legs threshing to the side one thought to launch into the air again only to fall for certain into a still deeper ditch. And of this one never wanted to make an end. How one might stretch oneself out, especially in the knees, properly to sleep in the last ditch, was something scarcely thought of, and one simply lay on one's back, like an invalid, inclined to weep a little. One blinked as now and then a youngster with elbows pressed to his sides sprang over one's head with dark looming soles, in a leap from the escarpment to the roadway. The moon was already some way up in the sky. In its light a mail coach drove past. A small wind began to blow everywhere, even in the ditch one could feel it, and nearby the forest began to rustle. Then one was no longer so anxious to be alone. Where are you? Come here. All together. What are you hiding for? Drop your nonsense. Don't you know the mail's gone past already? Not already? Of course. It went past while you were sleeping. I wasn't sleeping. What an idea. Oh shut up, you're still half asleep. But I wasn't. Come on. We ran bunched more closely together, many of us linked hands. One's head could not be held high enough, for now the way was downhill. Someone whooped an Indian war cry. Our legs galloped us as never before. The wind lifted our hips as we sprang. Nothing could have checked us. We were in such full stride that even in overtaking others we could fold our arms and look quietly around us. At the bridge over the brook we came to a stop. Those who had overrun it came back. The water below lapped against stones and roots as if it were not already late evening. There was no reason why one of us should not jump onto the parapet of the bridge. From behind clumps of trees in the distance a railway train came past. All the carriages were lit up, the window panes were certainly let down. One of us began to sing a popular catch, but we all felt like singing. We sang much faster than the train was going. We waved our arms because our voices were not enough. Our voices rushed together in an avalanche of sound that did us good. When one joins in song with others it is like being drawn on by a fishhook. So we sang, the forest behind us, for the ears of the distant travelers. The grown-ups were still awake in the village. The mothers were making down the beds for the night. Our time was up. I kissed the one next to me, reached hands to the three nearest, and began to run home. None called me back. At the first crossroads where they could no longer see me I turned off and ran by the field paths into the forest again. I was making for that city in the south of which it was said in our village. There you'll find queer folk. Just think, they never sleep. And why not? Because they never get tired. And why not? Because they're fools. Don't fools get tired? How could fools get tired? Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. The trees. For we are like tree trunks in the snow. In appearance they lie sleekly and a little push should be enough to set them rolling. No, it can't be done, for they are firmly wedded to the ground. But see, even that is only appearance. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Clothes. Often when I see clothes with manifold pleats, frills, and appendages which fit so smoothly onto lovely bodies I think they won't keep that smoothness long, but will get creases that can't be ironed out, dust lying so thick in the embroidery that it can't be brushed away, and that no one would want to be so unhappy and so foolish as to wear the same valuable gown every day from early morning till night. And yet I see girls who are lovely enough and display attractive muscles and small bones and smooth skin and masses of delicate hair, and nonetheless appear day in, day out, in this same natural fancy dress, always propping the same face on the same palms and letting it be reflected from the looking glass. Only sometimes at night, on coming home late from a party, it seems in the looking glass to be worn out, puffy, dusty, already seen by too many people, and hardly wearable any longer. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Excursion into the mountains. I don't know, I cried without being heard, I do not know. If nobody comes, then nobody comes. I've done nobody any harm, nobody's done me any harm, but nobody will help me. A pack of nobodies. Yet that isn't all true. Only, that nobody helps me. A pack of nobodies would be rather fine, on the other hand. I'd love to go on an excursion, why not, with a pack of nobodies. Into the mountains, of course, where else? How these nobodies jostle each other, all these lifted arms linked together, these numberless feet treading so close. Of course they're all in dress suits. We go so gaily, the wind blows through us and the gaps in our company Our throats swell and are free in the mountains. It's a wonder that we don't burst into song. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Rejection. When I meet a pretty girl and beg her, be so good as to come with me, and she walks past without a word, this is what she means to say. You are no duke with a famous name, no broad American with a red Indian figure, level, brooding eyes and a skin tempered by the air of the prairies and the rivers that flow through them. You have never journeyed to the 7 seas and voyaged on them wherever they may be, I don't know where. So why, pray, should a pretty girl like myself go with you? You forget that no automobile swings you through the street in long thrusts. I see no gentleman escorting you in a close half circle, pressing on your skirts from behind and murmuring blessings on your head. Your breasts are well laced into your bodice, but your thighs and hips make up for that restraint. You are wearing a taffeta dress with a pleated skirt such as delighted all of us last autumn, and yet you smile, inviting mortal danger, from time to time. Yes, we're both in the right, and to keep us from being irrevocably aware of it, hadn't we better just go our separate ways home? Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. The Street Window. Whoever leads a solitary life and yet now and then wants to attach himself somewhere, whoever, according to changes in the time of day, the weather, the state of his business, and the like, suddenly wishes to see any arm at all to which he might cling, he will not be able to manage for long without a window looking onto the street. And if he is in the mood of not desiring anything and only goes to his window sill a tired man, with eyes turning from his public to heaven and back again, not wanting to look out and having thrown his head up a little, even then the horses below will draw him down into their train of wagons and tumult, and so at last into the human harmony. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. The Tradesman. It is possible that some people are sorry for me, but I am not aware of it. My small business fills me with worries that make my forehead and temples ache inside yet without giving any prospect of relief, for my business is a small business. I have to spend hours beforehand making things ready, jogging the caretaker's memory, warning him about mistakes he is likely to commit, and puzzling out in one season of the year what the next season's fashions are to be, not such as are followed by the people I know but those that will appeal to inaccessible peasants in the depths of the country. My money is in the hands of strangers. The state of their affairs must be a mystery to me. The ill luck that might overwhelm them I cannot foresee. How could I possibly avert it? Perhaps they are running into extravagance and giving a banquet in some inn garden. Some of them may be attending the banquet as a brief respite before their flight to America. When at the close of a working day I turn the key on my business and suddenly see before me hours in which I shall be able to do nothing to satisfy its never-ending demands, then the excitement which I drove far away from me in the morning comes back like a returning tide, but cannot be contained in me and sweeps me aimlessly away with it. And yet I can make no use of this impulse. I can only go home, for my face and hands are dirty and sweaty, my clothes are stained and dusty, my working cap is on my head, and my shoes are scratched with the nails of crates. I go home as if lifted on a wave, snapping the fingers of both hands, and caress the hair of any children I meet. But the way is short. Soon I reach my house, open the door of the lift, and step in. I see that now, of a sudden, I am alone. Others who have to climb stairways tire a little as they climb, have to wait with quick panting breath till someone opens the door of the flat, which gives them an excuse for being irritable and impatient, have to traverse the hallway where hats are hung up, and not until they go down a lobby past several glass doors and come into their own room are they alone. But I am alone in the lift, immediately, and on my knees gaze into the narrow looking glass. As the lift begins to rise, I say, "Quiet now, back with you. Is it the shadow of the trees you want to make for, or behind the window curtains, or into the garden arbor?" I say that behind my teeth, and the staircase flows down past the opaque glass panes like running water. Fly then. Let your wings, which I have never seen, carry you into the village hollow or as far as Paris, if that's where you want to go. But enjoy yourselves there looking out of the window, see the processions converging out of 3 streets at once, not giving way to each other but marching through each other and leaving the open space free again as their last ranks draw off. Wave your handkerchiefs, be indignant, be moved, acclaim the beautiful lady who drives past. Cross over the stream on the wooden bridge, nod to the children bathing and gape at the hurrah, rising from the 1,000 sailors on the distant battleship. Follow the trail of the inconspicuous little man, and when you have pushed him into a doorway, rob him, and then watch him, each with your hands in your pockets, as he sadly goes his way along the left-hand street. The police dispersed on galloping horses rein in their mounts and thrust you back. Let them, the empty streets will dishearten them, I know. What did I tell you? They are riding away already in couples, slowly around the corners, at full speed across the squares. Then I have to leave the lift, send it down again, and ring the bell, and the maid opens the door while I say, "Good evening." Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Absent-minded window gazing. What are we to do with these spring days that are now fast coming on? Early this morning the sky was gray, but if you go to the window now you are surprised and lean your cheek against the latch of the casement. The sun is already setting, but down below you see it lighting up the face of the little girl who strolls along looking about her, and at the same time you see her eclipsed by the shadow of the man behind overtaking her. And then the man has passed by and the little girl's face is quite bright. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. The Way Home. See what a persuasive force the air has after a thunderstorm. My merits become evident and overpower me, though I don't put up any resistance, I grant you. I stride along and my tempo is the tempo of all my side of the street, of the whole quarter. Mine is the responsibility, and rightly so, for all the raps on doors or on the flat of a table, for all toasts drunk, for lovers in their beds, in the scaffolding of new buildings, pressed to each other against the house walls in dark alleys, or on the divans of a brothel. I weigh my past against my future, but find both of them admirable, cannot give either the preference, and find nothing to grumble at save the injustice of Providence that has so clearly favored me. Only as I come into my room I feel a little meditative, without having met anything on the stairs worth meditating about. It doesn't help me much to open the window wide and hear music still playing in a garden. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Passers-by. When you go walking by night up a street and a man, visible a long way off, for the street mounts uphill and there is a full moon, comes running toward you, well, you don't catch hold of him, not even if he is a feeble and ragged creature, not even if someone chases yelling at his heels, but you let him run on. For it is night, and you can't help it if the street goes uphill before you in the moonlight, and besides, these two have maybe started that chase to amuse themselves, or perhaps they are both chasing a third, perhaps the first is an innocent man and the second wants to murder him and you would become an accessory, perhaps they don't know anything about each other and are merely running separately home to bed, perhaps they are night birds, perhaps the first man is armed. And anyhow, haven't you a right to be tired, haven't you been drinking a lot of wine? You're thankful that the second man is now long out of sight. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. On the tram. I stand on the end platform of the tram and am completely unsure of my footing in this world, in this town, in my family. Not even casually could I indicate any claims that I might rightly advance in any direction. I have not even any defense to offer for standing on this platform, holding on to this strap, letting myself be carried along by this tram, nor for the people who give way to the tram or walk quietly along or stand gazing into shop windows. Nobody asks me to put up a defense, indeed, but that is irrelevant. The tram approaches a stopping place and a girl takes up her position near the step, ready to alight. She is as distinct to me as if I had run my hands over her. She is dressed in black, the pleats of her skirt hang almost still, her blouse is tight and has a collar of white fine meshed lace, her left hand is braced flat against the side of the tram, the umbrella in her right hand rests on the second top step. Her face is brown, her nose, slightly pinched at the sides, has a broad round tip. She has a lot of brown hair and stray little tendrils on the right temple. Her small ear is close set, but since I am near her I can see the whole ridge of the whorl of her right ear and the shadow at the root of it. At that point I ask myself, how is it that she is not amazed at herself, that she keeps her lips closed and makes no such remark? Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Reflections for Gentlemen Jockeys. When you think it over, winning a race is nothing to sigh for. The fame of being hailed as the best rider in the country is too intoxicating a pleasure when the applause strikes up not to bring a reaction the morning after. The envy of your opponents, cunning and fairly influential men, must trouble you in the narrow enclosure you now traverse after the flat racecourse, which soon lay empty before you save for some laggards of the previous round, small figures charging the horizon. Many of your friends are rushing to gather their winnings and only cry, hurrah, to you over their shoulders from distant payboxes. Your best friends laid no bet on your horse, since they feared that they would have to be angry with you if you lost, and now that your horse has come in first and they have won nothing, they turn away as you pass and prefer to look along the stands. Your rivals behind you, firmly in the saddle, are trying to ignore the bad luck that has befallen them and the injustice they have somehow suffered. They are putting a brave new face on things, as if a different race were due to start, and this time a serious one after such child's play. For many ladies the victor cuts a ridiculous figure because he is swelling with importance and yet cannot cope with the never-ending handshaking, saluting, bowing, and waving, while the defeated keep their mouths shut and casually pat the necks of their whinnying horses. And finally from the now overcast sky rain actually begins to fall. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. The wish to be a Red Indian. If one were only an Indian, instantly alert, and on a racing horse, leaning against the wind, kept on quivering jerkily over the quivering ground, until one shed one's spurs, for there needed no spurs, threw away the reins, for there needed no reins, and hardly saw that the land before one was smoothly shorn heath when horse's neck and head would be already gone. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Unhappiness. When it was becoming unbearable, once toward evening in November, and I ran along the narrow strip of carpet in my room as on a racetrack, shrank from the sight of the lit-up street, then turning to the interior of the room found a new goal in the depths of the looking-glass and screamed aloud, to hear only my own scream which met no answer nor anything that could draw its force away, so that it rose up without check and could not stop even when it ceased being audible. The door in the wall opened toward me. How swiftly, because swiftness was needed and even the cart horses down below on the paving stones were rising in the air like horses driven wild in a battle, their throats bared to the enemy. Like a small ghost a child blew in from the pitch-dark corridor, where the lamp was not yet lit, and stood a tiptoe on a floorboard that quivered imperceptibly. At once dazzled by the twilight in my room she made to cover her face quickly with her hands, but contented herself unexpectedly with a glance at the window, where the mounting vapor of the street lighting had at last settled under its cover of darkness behind the crossbars. With her right elbow she supported herself against the wall in the open doorway and let the draft from outside play along her ankles, her throat, and her temples. I gave her a brief glance, then said, "Good day," and took my jacket from the hood of the stove, since I didn't want to stand there half undressed. For a little while I let my mouth hang open, so that my agitation could find a way out. I had a bad taste in my mouth, my eyelashes were fluttering on my cheeks. In short, this visit, though I had expected it, was the one thing needful. The child was still standing by the wall on the same spot. She had pressed her right hand against the plaster and was quite taken up with finding, her cheeks all pink, that the whitewashed walls had a rough surface and chafed her fingertips. I said, "Are you really looking for me? Isn't there some mistake?" "Nothing easier than to make a mistake in this big building. I'm called so and so and I live on the 3rd floor. Am I the person you want to find?" "Hush, hush," said the child over her shoulder, "it's all right. Then come farther into the room, I'd like to shut the door." "I've shut it this very minute. Don't bother. Just be easy in your mind. It's no bother. But there's a lot of people living on this corridor, and I know them all, of course. Most of them are coming back from work now. If they hear someone talking in a room, they simply think they have a right to open the door and see what's happening. They're just like that. They've turned their backs on their daily work, and in their provisionally free evenings they're not going to be dictated to by anyone. Besides, you know that as well as I do. Let me shut the door." "Why, what's the matter with you?" "I don't mind if the whole house comes in. Anyhow, as I told you, I've already shut the door. Do you think you're the only person who can shut doors? I've even turned the key in the lock." "That's all right then. I couldn't ask for more. You didn't need to turn the key, either. And now that you are here, make yourself comfortable. You are my guest. You can trust me entirely. Just make yourself at home and don't be afraid. I won't compel you either to stay or to go away. Do I have to tell you that? Do you know me so little? No, you really didn't need to tell me that. What's more, you shouldn't have told me. I'm just a child. Why stand on so much ceremony with me? It's not so bad as that. A child, of course. But not so very small. You're quite big. If you were a young lady, you wouldn't dare to lock yourself so simply in a room with me. We needn't worry about that. I just want to say, my knowing you so well isn't much protection to me. It only relieves you of the effort of keeping up pretenses before me. And yet you're paying me a compliment. Stop it, I beg you, do stop it. Anyhow, I don't know you everywhere and all the time, least of all in this darkness. It would be much better if you were to light up. No, perhaps not. At any rate, I'll keep it in mind that you have been threatening me." "What, am I supposed to have threatened you? But, look here, I'm so pleased that you've come at last. I say, at last, because it's already rather late. I can't understand why you've come so late. But it's possible that in the joy of seeing you I have been speaking at random and you took up my words in the wrong sense. I'll admit 10 times over that I said something of the kind. I've made all kinds of threats, anything you like. Only no quarreling, for heaven's sake. But how could you think of such a thing? How could you hurt me so? Why do you insist on spoiling this brief moment of your presence here? A stranger would be more obliging than you are. That I can well believe. That's no great discovery. No stranger could come any nearer to you than I am already by nature. You know that, too, so why all this pathos? If you're only wanting to stage a comedy, I'll go away immediately." "What, you have the impudence to tell me that? You make a little too bold. After all, it's my room you're in. It's my wall you're rubbing your fingers on like mad. My room, my wall. And besides, what you are saying is ridiculous as well as impudent. You say your nature forces you to speak to me like that. Is that so? Your nature forces you? That's kind of your nature. Your nature is mine, and if I feel friendly to you by nature, then you mustn't be anything else. Is that friendly? I'm speaking of earlier on. Do you know how I'll be later on? I don't know anything. And I went to the bed table and lit the candle on it. At that time I had neither gas nor electric light in my room. Then I sat for a while at the table till I got tired of it, put on my greatcoat, took my hat from the sofa, and blew out the candle. As I went out I tripped over the leg of a chair. On the stairs I met one of the tenants from my floor. "Going out again already, you rascal?" he asked, pausing with his legs firmly straddled over 2 steps. "What can I do?" I said. "I've just had a ghost in my room." "You say that exactly as if you had just found a hair in your soup. You're making a joke of it. But let me tell you, a ghost is a ghost." "How true. But what if one doesn't believe in ghosts at all?" "Well, do you think I believe in ghosts? But how can my not believing help me?" "Quite simply. You don't need to feel afraid if a ghost actually turns up. Oh, that's only a secondary fear. The real fear is a fear of what caused the apparition. And that fear doesn't go away. I have it fairly powerfully inside me now. Out of sheer nervousness I began to hunt through all my pockets. But since you weren't afraid of the ghost itself, you could easily have asked it how it came to be there. Obviously you've never spoken to a ghost. One never gets straight information from them. It's just a hither and thither. These ghosts seem to be more dubious about their existence than we are, and no wonder, considering how frail they are. But I've heard that one can fatten them up. How well informed you are. It's quite true. But is anyone likely to do it? Why not? If it were a feminine ghost, for instance, said he, swinging onto the top step. Aha, said I, but even then it's not worthwhile. I thought of something else. My neighbor was already so far up that in order to see me he had to bend over the well of the staircase. All the same, I called up, if you steal my ghost from me all is over between us, forever. Oh, I was only joking, he said and drew his head back. That's all right, said I, and now I really could have gone quietly for a walk. But because I felt so forlorn I preferred to go upstairs again and so went to bed. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Bachelor's ill luck. It seems so dreadful to stay a bachelor, to become an old man struggling to keep one's dignity while begging for an invitation whenever one wants to spend an evening in company, to lie ill-gazing for weeks into an empty room from the corner where one's bed is, always having to say goodnight at the front door, never to run up a stairway beside one's wife, to have only side doors in one's room leading into other people's living rooms, having to carry one's supper home in one's hand, having to admire other people's children and not even being allowed to go on saying, I have none myself, modeling oneself in appearance and behavior on one or two bachelors remembered from one's youth. That's how it will be, except that in reality, both today and later, one will stand there with a palpable body and a real head, a real forehead, that is, for smiting on with one's hand. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. Unmasking a confidence trickster. At last, about 10 o'clock at night, I came to the doorway of the fine house where I was invited to spend the evening, after the man beside me, whom I was barely acquainted with and who had once again thrust himself unasked upon me, had marched me for 2 long hours around the streets. Well, I said, and clapped my hands to show that I really had to bid him goodbye. I had already made several less explicit attempts to get rid of him. I was tired out. Are you going straight in? He asked. I heard a sound in his mouth that was like the snapping of teeth. Yes. I had been invited out, I told him when I met him. But it was to enter a house where I longed to be that I had been invited, not to stand here at the street door looking past the ears of the man before me. Nor to fall silent with him, as if we were doomed to stay for a long time on this spot. And yet the houses around us at once took a share in our silence, and the darkness over them, all the way up to the stars. And the steps of invisible passers-by, which one could not take the trouble to elucidate, and the wind persistently buffeting the other side of the street, and a gramophone singing behind the closed windows of some room, they all announced themselves in this silence, as if it were their own possession for the time past and to come. And my companion subscribed to it in his own name and, with a smile, in mine too, stretched his right arm up along the wall and leaned his cheek upon it, shutting his eyes. But I did not wait to see the end of that smile, for shame suddenly caught hold of me. It had needed that smile to let me know that the man was a confidence trickster, nothing else. And yet I had been months in the town and thought I knew all about confidence tricksters, how they came slinking out of side streets by night to meet us with outstretched hands like tavern keepers, how they haunted the advertisement pillars we stood beside, sliding around them as if playing hide and seek and spying on us with at least one eye, how they suddenly appeared on the curb of the pavement across streets when we were hesitating. I understood them so well. They were the first acquaintances I had made in the town's small taverns, and to them I owed my first inkling of the ruthless hardness which I was now so conscious of, everywhere on earth, that I was even beginning to feel it in myself. How persistently they blocked our way, even when we had long shaken ourselves free, even when, that is, they had nothing more to hope for. How they refused to give up, to admit defeat, but kept shooting glances at us that even from a distance were still compelling. And the means they employed were always the same. They planted themselves before us, looking as large as possible, tried to hinder us from going where we purposed, offered us instead a habitation in their own bosoms, and when at last all our balked feelings rose in revolt they welcomed that like an embrace into which they threw themselves face foremost. And it had taken me such a long time in this man's company to recognize the same old game. I rubbed my fingertips together to wipe away the disgrace. My companion was still leaning there as before, still believing himself a successful trickster, and his self-complacency glowed pink on his free cheek. Caught in the act, said I, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. Then I ran up the steps, and the disinterested devotion on the servants' faces in the hall delighted me like an unexpected treat. I looked at them all, one after another, while they took my greatcoat off and wiped my shoes clean. With a deep breath of relief and straightening myself to my full height, I then entered the drawing room. Translated by Willa and Edwin Muir. The Sudden Walk.
When it looks as if you had made up your mind finally to stay at home for the evening, when you have put on your house jacket and sat down after supper with a light on the table to the piece of work or the game that usually precedes your going to bed, when the weather outside is unpleasant so that staying indoors seems natural, and when you have already been sitting quietly at the table for so long that your departure must occasion surprise to everyone, when, besides, the stairs are in darkness and the front door locked, and in spite of all that you have started up in a sudden fit of restlessness, changed your jacket, abruptly dressed yourself for the street, explained that you must go out and with a few curt words of leave-taking actually gone out, banging the flat door more or less hastily according to the degree of displeasure you think you have left behind you, and when you find yourself once more in the street with limbs swinging extra freely in answer to the unexpected liberty you have procured for them, When as a result of this decisive action you feel concentrated within yourself all the potentialities of decisive action, when you recognize with more than usual significance that your strength is greater than your need to accomplish effortlessly the swiftest of changes and to cope with it, when in this frame of mind you go striding down the long streets, then for that evening you have completely got away from your family, which fades into insubstantiality, while you yourself, a firm, boldly drawn black figure, slapping yourself on the thigh, grow to your